The sweltering July morning in 2011 began with an unusual disturbance on the shores of Keystone Lake, Oklahoma. 6 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a small wooden house by the lake, which had once been a research station for the Water Resources Department in the 1970s. Neighbors in the area stood peeking from behind their curtains, watching as officers in cold case unit uniforms set up forensic equipment around the backyard. Inside, Dr. Eleanor Brooks, 73 years old, was brewing her morning tea, a habit she had maintained for many years in New York before being extradited back to her hometown for questioning. On the table, an old notebook and a Parker 51 pen were sealed in evidence bags. The urgent knocking on the door sounded at 7:32 a.m. Eleanor Brooks, Oklahoma State Police. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Dr. Richard Halden in 1970. The officers later recounted that her hand trembled slightly as she set down the teacup, but her eyes remained eerily calm, as if she had known this day would come and had been prepared for it for over 40 years. The evening of November 12, 1970. Rain poured down the empty roads around the town of Norman, Oklahoma, casting a hazy mist over the rusted street signs. The clock at Central State Hospital showed just before 9 p.m. when Dr. Richard Halden, 33 years old, locked his office door, threw on his brown sweater, and grabbed his leather briefcase before leaving the main building. The gate guard remembered him pausing for a brief greeting, then hurrying to the parking lot, where his turquoise Ford Galaxy was parked amid the thick rain. Before opening the car door, he pulled a note from his coat pocket, glanced at it, and stuffed it back in. According to colleagues, Halden had said he would be heading to Tulsa that evening, about an hour's drive from Norman, to meet an old acquaintance. Dr. Eleanor Brooks, who had worked with him at this hospital a few years earlier. No one knew the exact reason for the meeting. They only heard him say briefly, "I need to talk to her about an old patient." That was the last time anyone saw Richard Halden alive. That night, the rain continued into the early hours. At the small house on Mayfield Road in Norman, Margaret Halden, his wife, sat by the window, a cold cup of coffee in her hand. Her husband often came home late, but never after midnight. At 1 a.m., she called the hospital. No one knew where he was. By 3 a.m., the rain tapered off, but in Margaret's heart, a chilling unease spread. As dawn broke, she drove to the hospital. The Galaxy was not in the parking lot. The duty log showed he had left the facility at exactly 8:47 p.m., with no message left behind. On his desk, there was still a half-empty coffee cup and an open stack of patient files. No one saw him leave Norman, and there were no calls from him to the family that night. The next day, November 13th, Margaret called the county police station. Sheriff Raymond Cole took the report and asked her to wait another 24 hours, since adults could leave voluntarily. She tried calling Eleanor Brooks again, the person her husband had mentioned, but no one answered. As the afternoon wore on, the worry grew. Halden was punctual, never absent without notice. By nightfall, Margaret drove along the highway toward Tulsa, scanning every roadside ditch, hoping to find some sign, a car, a dropped item, or simply the reflection from the green paint. But everything was swallowed by the darkness and fog. On the morning of November 14th, 2 days after he left the hospital, Richard Halden was officially traceless. No contact, no withdrawals, no return home, and no visits to any medical facilities. The last time anyone heard his name was during the night shift on the 12th. That same morning, Margaret walked into the Tulsa police station, her hands trembling as she held a photo of her husband in front of their house. A gentle smile, white shirt, shiny black briefcase. Her voice was hoarse. He would never just leave like that. Something happened to him. At 9 a.m., Tulsa police officially opened missing person case hash 7112. Outside, the rain began to fall again. The very next afternoon, November 15, 1970, the photo of Halden on Sheriff Raymond Cole's desk was already frayed at the edges from being handled repeatedly. He stared at the man's face in the picture, kind, a bit weary, and said quietly to his deputy, "No one disappears like this without leaving a trace." The first order went out. verify the entire route from Norman to Tulsa. 3 patrol teams fanned out, combing every gas station, motel and levee road around Keystone Lake, where a witness had reported seeing headlights veer off the road into the rainy night. By noon, the results came back. No accidents, no skid marks, no wrecked car. No checkpoint had recorded the Ford Galaxy 4B 2791 passing through. A search helicopter team scanned the lake shore, finding only murky water and swirling mud. Everything was silent, to an unbelievable degree. Sheriff Cole wrote in his report, both car and man vanished. No clues, no witnesses, no signals. That afternoon, the investigative team began working with the last people connected to Halden. The first name on the list was Dr. Eleanor Brooks, his former colleague at Central State Hospital. 2 officers, Sergeant Daniel Moore and Lieutenant Frank Harvey, knocked on the door of her private office in South Tulsa's medical district. Eleanor greeted them with composure. Her office was neat, filled with files and diplomas covering the walls. When asked, she only gave a faint smile. "No, I didn't meet Richard that night. We'd exchanged a few letters, that's all." Moore jotted down every word, his eyes scanning the desk, where an open Oklahoma map was tucked between stacks of papers. Eleanor said that, on the evening of November 12th, she had been home with her grandson Jack Brooks, 23 years old, a medical student. The police left at 5 p.m. An hour later. They arrived at Jack's small apartment in Riverside. Jack was thin, with a weary demeanor, and answered hesitantly, "I don't know anything about it. That night, I was home, didn't go out." Moore asked again, "What time did you get home from the library?" Jack replied, "Around 8:30, but the school's borrowing records showed 8:12 p.m., nearly 2 hours earlier." Moore stared at him for a long moment, then closed his notebook. On November 16th, per Cole's directive, the patrol teams continued expanding the search along Highway 51. When they reached the Keystone Dam area, the rain had just stopped, leaving the ground soggy. At the entrance to the West Levee Road, Lieutenant Harvey bent down with his flashlight. 2 parallel tire tracks, etched deep into the clay, about 3 meters long, then abruptly vanishing right at the water's edge. Measured with a technical ruler, the distance between the tracks matched the wheelbase of a Ford Galaxy. Harvey marked the spot with red stakes. Nearby, they picked up a small mud-caked metal fragment that appeared to be from a front bumper and a Chesterfield cigarette butt, the exact brand Halden smoked. That evening, the report was sent back to the Tulsa Command Center. Sheriff Cole read it through, tapping his pen lightly on the desk. "The car isn't on the surface anymore, so either it's underwater or it was hidden." He ordered a salvage operation first thing the next morning. The dive team made 3 passes, scanning the suspected area, nearly 300 square meters, with sonar, but found only mud, trash, and rotten tree stumps. No car, no body. While the scene remained deadlocked, another lead emerged from the Norman Hospital. A nurse named Clara Jennings told investigators that the week before, Halden had seemed anxious, sometimes glancing down the hallways, as if afraid of being followed. She clearly remembered him saying something that chilled her to the bone. "If anything happens to me, tell Margaret I didn't do it to myself." The statement was recorded in the file and sent straight to Cole's office. On November 18th, police summoned Eleanor for the second time. The interrogation was brief but tense. Cole asked directly, "Do you know why Halden told others he was being threatened?" Eleanor looked him straight in the eye, her voice even and cold. "No. Maybe he was having psychological issues. He was once his own patient, Sheriff." The answer was too quick, too smooth. As he left the room, Cole turned to Moore and whispered, "Normal people don't use a victim's past to defend themselves." That same evening, Cole received the final report from the Keystone Lake Patrol team. The water had begun to recede slightly, revealing an additional parallel tire track alongside the first 2, likely from a smaller vehicle, possibly a companion car or one that stopped at the scene. Under flashlight beams, the tread marks were clear before fading into the darkness toward the woods. Cole stood silently by the lake shore, listening to the water lapping gently against the mudflat. He knew he had just crossed the line from a simple missing person case to a full-fledged criminal investigation. Rain poured all night. By the morning of November 19, 1970, as the waters of Keystone Lake receded slightly, the Tulsa Police Department's rescue team was ready to launch the largest search operation in county history. Sheriff Raymond Cole's order was succinct: find the car. If it's underwater, we'll see it today. Divers from emergency response units in 2 neighboring cities arrived, bringing sonar equipment to scan the lake bottom, technology that was still rare at the time. They set up a command post right on the West Lake shore, where the 2 deep tire tracks in the clay matched the dimensions of Dr. Halden's Ford Galaxy. The air was heavy and damp. The smell of mud and old gasoline mingled in the cold wind. Before diving, Lieutenant Frank Harvey pointed out over the murky water, "If the car went in from here, it has to be within a 300-foot radius. Start from the red stakes." 3 divers slipped into the icy water, their yellow lights flickering faintly below the surface. It took nearly an hour to scan the entire suspected area, but they only found a few rusted iron scraps and a small metal frame. No sign of a vehicle. When they surfaced, one diver said, "It's all mud and rotten logs down there. If a car went in, it would have sunk several feet deep." Meanwhile, the forensics team began reconstructing the scene on shore. 2 parallel tire tracks ran about 3 meters, stopping abruptly at the edge of the land, as if the driver had braked late. Harvey measured the wheelbase, 59 inches, an exact match for Ford's specs. Nearby, Sergeant Moore picked up a mud-caked metal fragment about 7 centimeters long, with a curved edge and turquoise paint, the same shade as Halden's car. He carefully placed it in an evidence bag, labeling it, "Suspected front bumper fragment, needs analysis." Other officers found a Chesterfield cigarette butt with a half-burned ash, the exact brand Margaret Halden said her husband always carried. All evidence was photographed, sealed carefully, and sent to the city lab. As the sun began to set, the second dive team continued the search, expanding the area another 200 feet south. They dragged iron hooks across the bottom, pulling up rotten logs, rusted beer cans, and discarded cables. Once, a hook snagged something heavy that made everyone hold their breath. But when it surfaced, it was just an empty oil drum covered in mud. On shore, Sheriff Cole stood with arms crossed, staring out at the water. He had hoped for at least some sign, a shard of glass, a license plate. But Keystone Lake remained silent, reflecting only the gray sky. That night, November 19th, the rain fell again. The whole area turned into a muddy quagmire. Police cars sank halfway into the clay, their headlights reflecting white raindrops. Harvey wrote in the scene log, "No car wreckage, possibly hidden or towed away. The rain is washing everything clean." The next day, November 20th, the forensics team brought the evidence to the analysis lab. The small metal fragment was cleaned, revealing intact light green paint beneath the rust, with a faint stamped code, 419, a mark matching the 1967-1970 Ford Galaxy line. However, it couldn't be confirmed as belonging to Halden's vehicle without the VIN. The preliminary analysis report concluded, "High likelihood it belongs to the same type of vehicle, but insufficient legal basis." While awaiting results, police expanded the search around the lakeside woods. Local residents joined in, bringing tracking dogs and flashlights. They followed trails, checking for anything unusual. One found a black oil stain on the ground near the east shore, but later tests showed it was just agricultural machine oil. A hunter reported hearing a loud engine roar, then silence around 10:30 p.m. on November 12th, but he saw nothing due to the heavy rain. Though unverifiable, Cole noted it in the file. The press began covering it, with bold headlines in the Tulsa World. "Doctor vanishes with Ford, no trace, no scene." Reporters swarmed Keystone Lake, photographing police wading through mud, describing the eerie scene, still water, yellow lights reflecting like unhealed wounds. On November 21st, The forensics team returned to the area one last time to collect soil samples. They staked measurements of the tire slippage, took panoramic photos, and noted the direction of travel. The vehicle appeared to have veered off the main road at average speed, not out of control. Initial conclusion: the driver intentionally turned onto the dirt path leading to the lake shore. That raised a big question for Cole. If he drove in here himself, what or who made him do it? The search paused after 5 straight days, 32 hours of underwater diving, and over 20 participants. Results: no body, no car, just a few metal scraps, cigarette butts, and faint tire tracks. But when pieced together, Cole saw they all pointed in one direction at one time. In the search wrap-up report, he wrote, "The victim did not leave Norman of his own accord. Someone made him go, and the car did not vanish naturally. Rain may hide tracks, but it cannot erase the truth." That night, as police cars gradually pulled away from the lake shore, Keystone's surface grew flat and still again. The last seasonal rain pattered on the car roofs, mixing with the static radio broadcasting the missing person alert. At the other end of the state, Margaret Halden sat in the living room, gazing out the window, waiting for the familiar engine sound she knew would never return. And at the Tulsa police station, Raymond Cole closed the temporary case file, adding one short line before turning off the office light. No car found, no person found, but something under the lake is still waiting to be seen. On November 22, 1970, as the wind calmed over Keystone Lake, the investigative team shifted focus from search to trace analysis. The mud samples, fabric fibers, cigarette butts, and metal fragments collected in the initial sweep were sent to the forensics lab at Tulsa headquarters. At that time, testing technology was rudimentary. No DNA or micromatching. All analysis relied on chemical assays, microscopes, and color comparisons. Under cold lights, technician Tom Riley used tweezers to pick through the sealed fibers. One dark brown fiber, thin and soft, was identified as natural wool, the type used in high-end men's coats. They compared it to a sample from the sweater Margaret Halden had submitted, the one her husband often wore to work, and found the fibers matched in structure. However, it wasn't enough evidence for charges, just a coincidental point. The Chesterfield butt was examined under a microscope. The tip still clung with fine fabric threads and soil particles, indicating the smoker had tossed it while standing on damp clay ground. No clear fingerprints. The rain had washed them away. The lakeshore metal fragment showed green paint, matching the color spectrum of 1968, 1970 Ford Galaxies, but the paint code couldn't confirm it was Halden's car. The preliminary forensics report affirmed only one thing: the vehicle may have been present at the scene, but no basis to determine criminal activity. While the lab toiled over every detail, Sergeant Daniel Moore returned to the Halden home to comb through personal effects. He opened closets, suitcases, drawers, the desk. Wallet, watch, bank cards, and ID were all intact. No signs of preparing to leave. On the nightstand sat the half-read novel, marked with a handwritten note: "Heart meds, follow-up next week." Police concluded he had no intention of running away. In the living room, Margaret sat silently, twisting a cold teacup in her hands. When Moore asked, she replied in a soft but firm voice, "Last week, he was so strange. Always looking around, like he was afraid someone was watching. On Friday evening, he said to me, 'If anything happens, remember I didn't do it to myself.'" Moore looked her in the eye. "Did he mention any names?" "Yes, he mentioned Eleanor Brooks. They had a disagreement over research, but I don't know why he was so scared." That same day, Raymond Cole ordered Eleanor's second summons. The interrogation took place that afternoon, November 22nd, at her Tulsa office. Eleanor remained composed, her white blouse without a single wrinkle. When asked about the evening of November 12th, she answered immediately, "I was home all evening. Heavy rain, I didn't go out. Jack and I watched TV until nearly midnight." Cole tilted his head, his voice low but firm. "No one saw you except your grandson. No calls, no phone bills, No neighbors saw your car. Can you prove that? Eleanor paused for a moment, then said, no. But I had no reason to meet Richard. Cole observed her hands. Nails neatly trimmed, but a faint scratch on the middle finger of her right hand, as if recently healed. He said nothing, just noted it. That evening, police went to the Riverside area where Jack Brooks rented a place. The second-floor apartment was damp, with a half-open window and a heavy smell of cigarette smoke. Jack looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. When questioned again about his schedule on November 12th evening, he insisted, I was home. She was working in her room and I was reading. Moore asked, what time did you get back from the library? Around 8:30. The library records show you left at 8:12. Jack stiffened, then changed the subject. The police left, but as they recorded the statement, a neighbor called them back. Mrs. Nancy Collier, who lived downstairs, said that around 10:45 p.m. that night, she heard an engine pulling away from the back parking lot, like an old Ford, then silence. When shown a photo of Halden's Ford Galaxy, she nodded slowly. Exactly like that, light green. I remember, because the headlights shone right into my window. The next morning, Moore reported back to Cole. The sheriff said only one thing. If the neighbor's right, Jack wasn't home. He decided to put discreet surveillance on the young man while rechecking Eleanor's schedule. No direct evidence, but the coincidence between the time of Halden's disappearance and the second set of tire tracks at Keystone Lake was becoming hard to ignore. On November 24th, Cole and Moore returned to the Norman Hospital, where Halden worked. A colleague, Dr. Stephen Malloy, confirmed that before vanishing, Halden had mentioned a lawsuit related to psychological research Eleanor had overseen. In Halden's office, they found an unsealed envelope addressed Dr. E. Brooks, confidential notes enclosed. It was empty inside. No one knew what had been in it, or if it had ever been sent. On the 25th, the investigation hit a stalemate. All evidence was vague, all statements had gaps, but nothing sufficient for charges. Cole, in an internal meeting, told his team, I don't believe Halden left alone, nor do I think this was an accident. Someone got him out of Norman that night, and that person knew exactly how much he trusted them. As the autumn rain began falling over Tulsa again, the first clues gradually aligned into a hazy shape: a doctor who vanished, a colleague denying the meeting, a grandson with mismatched statements, and a second faint tire track imprinted by the lake shore. None of them knew that right there, 40 years later, the truth would rise from the deep mud like a confession long waiting to be spoken. On the morning of November 26, 1970, as the investigation entered its second week, Sheriff Raymond Cole decided to expand the scope of the examination. The contradictions in Jack Brooks's statement, combined with Eleanor's unusually cold demeanor, convinced him something was still being hidden. A warrant to search Jack's home was approved that same day. The small apartment in Riverside was quiet, with yellowed floral wallpaper. Jack stood at the door, his hand trembling slightly as the police entered. Moore and Harvey began meticulously searching every cabinet, every drawer, not overlooking even the floor rugs. In the corner of the study room, amid stacks of medical textbooks and journals, Moore found a folded sheet of paper, the edges damp, speckled with mud. He unfolded it and saw it was a hand-drawn map of the Keystone Lake area, marked in blue ink with a small turnoff looping toward the west side of the lake, where the tire tracks had been discovered. In the bottom right corner, in slanted, elegant handwriting, were the clear words, E. Brooks. Moore called Cole to the scene. Upon seeing the map, Cole said nothing for a few seconds. He only ordered, seal it back up. Don't let anyone touch it. Jack stood silently, his face paling. When questioned, he stammered, That's just a note from my aunt. She once said she wanted to go picnicking at Keystone Lake. I just kept it. Cole looked straight at him. And that's why this paper is muddy, right? Jack didn't answer. Meanwhile, Harvey discovered an additional purchase receipt clipped into Jack's notebook. The old receipt, printed from Tulsa Hardware, dated November 10, 1970, 2 days before Halden's disappearance. Scribbled in blue ballpoint pen. E. Brooks, 1 Sledgehammer, paid cash. The seller signed W. Harris. Both Cole and Moore understood the significance of this small piece of paper. A sledgehammer, bought right before the disappearance occurred, in cash, and the buyer matching the name mentioned on the map. Circumstantial evidence, but heavy as stone. That afternoon, Cole summoned Eleanor Brooks for the third time. The interrogation took place at the Tulsa police station. Eleanor arrived alone, wearing a gray coat, her expression calm to the point of being frightening. Cole placed the map and receipt on the table, his voice hoarse but firm. "Can you explain to me why your name appears on two pieces of evidence related to Keystone Lake, where the victim's tire tracks were found?" Eleanor glanced at the receipt, then looked up slowly. "I bought that hammer to fix the floorboards. It has nothing to do with Richard Halden. And the map I drew to guide Jack on a picnic. We often went fishing there." Cole tapped his pen lightly on the table. "It's strange, isn't it? Right around the time Halden disappears, his car is presumed to have gone into that lake, and you have a map and a new hammer. Don't you think that's too much of a coincidence?" Eleanor's face didn't change. "I don't control the weather or where other people go, Sheriff." The interrogation lasted nearly 2 hours. As she left the room, Eleanor turned back. "If you're trying to build a story, I advise you to find more evidence. I'm a doctor. I know what constitutes proof." The door closed behind her, leaving the room heavy with tension. On November 28th, police took the receipt to Tulsa Hardware for verification. The salesperson, Walter Harris, 49 years old, vaguely remembered a blonde woman with glasses coming in to buy a hammer early that week, paying cash. "She was with a young guy, looked like a student," he said. "I remember because she asked detailed questions about the weight of the 10-pound hammer." This testimony matched the details on the receipt, but there were no cameras or other receipts for corroboration. On November 30th, Cole sent a preliminary report to the district prosecutor's office. Physical evidence existed but lacked direct elements. No body, no crime scene, no witnesses to the criminal act. Prosecutor Mark Grayson just shook his head. "No body, no crime. I can't prosecute a doctor just because of a receipt and a muddy piece of paper." By the end of December, all efforts to find more traces failed. Winter rains reflooded the Keystone Lake area. The map, receipt, and metal fragment were sealed in evidence bags and stored in the archives. On January 5, 1971, Raymond Cole signed the final document of the year. Halden case. Insufficient basis for criminal charges. File temporarily closed. That evening, as he left the office, Cole paused in front of the bulletin board, looking at Dr. Halden's photo pinned among dozens of other missing persons cases. Rain pattered outside the porch. He said softly, almost to himself, "If she's truly innocent, then why do all the traces lead toward the lake?" But no one answered. Only the wind howled through the window, and the yellow light reflected off the map that had begun to turn brown. The case closed in silence, temporarily, but never truly ended. After the insufficient basis for criminal charges document was signed in early 1971, Dr. Richard Halden's disappearance quickly sank beneath layers of other files in the Tulsa Police Department's archives. The brown folder was stamped in red. Missing person #7112. Inside were a few black and white photos of the Keystone Lake shore, a few sealed evidence bags, and witness statements printed on yellowed carbon paper. No one in the unit believed the case would be revisited. A disappearance with no body, no witnesses, and a suspect too smart to be caught off guard. In the years that followed, the world changed. But file #7112 remained untouched in the steel cabinet in the basement behind the police station. Eleanor Brooks left Oklahoma just a few months after the case closed. She sold her house in Tulsa, moved to New York, obtained a license to practice clinical psychology, and quickly built a reputation in the medical community. On paper, she was the perfect model: high credentials, no criminal record, no open investigations. In society's eyes, the story of the doctor, once linked to a mysterious disappearance, became a vague rumor no one verified. Jack Brooks, the nephew, who had been a person of interest, vanished from public records. According to Florida state documents, He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1978 following a severe paranoid episode. From then on, Jack lived in care facilities, no family, no occupation, known to almost no one. Everything related to the Halden case was gradually swallowed by time. Throughout the 1980s, file #7112 was mentioned only a few times in local newspaper cold case columns, like in the Tulsa World or the Norman Transcript. Each anniversary of the disappearance, reporters would ask a few questions, then move on. Short articles with headlines like "Doctor Vanishes in the Rain" or "40 Years, No Answers" appeared in the weekend sections, accompanied by a faded photo of Halden from 1969. Margaret Halden, his wife, passed away in 1984 without knowing what happened to her husband. Their house was sold to another family, and no one mentioned the man who once lived there. In the 1990s, as DNA technology began to be used in criminal investigations, a few young officers suggested reviewing old cases, but most were denied due to budget reasons. "No body, nothing to test, the evidence room," Lieutenant replied when asked. And so the sealed bags containing the green-painted metal fragment, the Chesterfield cigarette butt, the hardware store receipt, and the handwritten map with E. Brooks' signature remained still in the wooden box, labeled faintly, "Do not destroy, unresolved." Entering the new century, the case was almost completely forgotten. Sheriff Cole retired in 1979 and died 10 years later. The file he left behind had only one handwritten note: "If anyone reopens this, start with the map." It wasn't until 2010, 40 years after that rainy night, that Richard Halden's name reappeared on the state's investigation list. The Oklahoma State Police, in coordination with the Federal Prosecutor's Office, launched the Oklahoma Cold Case Review Project, a program reviewing hundreds of unsolved cases from the 1960s, 1980s. Selection criteria were files with intact physical evidence that could be subjected to modern forensic techniques. When the review team reached file #7112, they discovered the sealed bag still bore Cole's signature and untorn old police stamps. The box contained a rusted hammerhead, a small brown fabric scrap, the handwritten map with E. Brooks, and full transcripts of interrogations with Eleanor and Jack. Captain Sarah Miller, then 36 years old and in charge of the program, was the first to read the entire file. She sat in the old storage room, dim fluorescent lights illuminating Halden's black and white photo, and realized this was no ordinary missing person case. There were signs of violence, a clear suspect, physical evidence, just missing one piece, the body. "We can do this," she said, her voice firm. On September 17, 2010, the Richard Halden case, missing person #7112, was officially added to Oklahoma's cold case priority list. After 40 years, those old evidence bags were opened once more, and the dust of time began to be brushed away. No one expected that from here, one of Oklahoma's longest-standing mysteries was about to be unraveled, thanks to the very evidence that in 1971 had been deemed useless. January 2011. Winter winds swept through the halls of the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation headquarters, carrying a biting chill and the smell of old paper. In the file storage room, Captain Sarah Miller, along with two other investigators, Ben Howard and Lydia Price, donned rubber gloves and gently opened the sealed wooden box labeled #7112, which had lain dormant for over 4 decades. On the lid, the faint words, "Richard Halden, missing person 1970, were still clearly visible under the white light. Next to it was the shaky signature of Raymond Cole, the sheriff who had led this case and had long since passed away. Sarah took a deep breath. "This was his case," she said softly. "We'll pick up where he left off." Inside the box were 4 old sealed bags, the tape yellowed to brown. The first bag contained a rusted hammerhead, the wooden handle rotted, still clinging with dark brown streaks. The second was a handwritten map of the Keystone Lake area, with blue ink in the bottom right corner, E. Brooks. The third held a small brown fabric scrap, and the final one was the Tulsa hardware purchase receipt. clearly stating E. Brooks, sledgehammer, paid cash. October 11, 1970. Miller carefully placed each bag on the glass table, taking digital photos for the record. Each piece of evidence carried the scent of dampness and time, but this young investigator looked at them as puzzle pieces that could speak what 40 years ago humans had not yet heard. DNA technology now can do what in 1971 they only dreamed of, Sarah said. If this is blood, we'll know. The cold case unit team decided to send all samples to the Oklahoma City State Forensics Lab, home to the most advanced DNA lab in the American South. In the testing proposal log, Sarah clearly stated the objective: determine if human blood is present on evidence, hammerhead, fabric scrap. Compare if feasible with DNA sample from Dr. Halden's relative. On January 21, 2011, 2 agents transported the evidence in a refrigerated case, signing it over at the lab. The transport log noted, delivered intact, old seals unbroken. When the box was opened, Dr. Thomas Greer, senior forensic expert, leaned over to examine the hammerhead. He shook his head, saying to the research team, "This evidence has been exposed for over 40 years, but sometimes, what's left behind is so small, people wouldn't believe it." They cut a section of wood from the darkest spot, using enzyme solution to extract potential DNA. The metal part was cleaned with ammonium citrate solution, then examined under an electron microscope. Right at the edge of the rust, clusters of dark red cells appeared, tiny enough to be invisible to the naked eye. Greer leaned close to the screen. "No doubt about it, this is human blood." While the lab began the STR analysis process, modern DNA sequencing, Sarah's team in Tulsa continued reviewing old details. They contacted Caleb Halden, Richard Halden's grandson, now living in California, requesting a reference DNA sample. Caleb agreed immediately, sending back 2 sealed buccal swabs per forensic standards. "If this helps uncover the truth about my grandfather, I'll do anything," he wrote in a handwritten letter to Sarah. The following weeks were a chain of waiting. While results were pending, Sarah spent hours reviewing every page in the old file, photos of the tire tracks, transcripts of Eleanor and Jack Brooks's statements, and Sheriff Cole's final note. "If anyone reopens this, start with the map." She spread the map on the table, using a magnifying glass to scrutinize every ink stroke. In the left corner, a smudged pen mark, as if written hastily with wet hands. "If we confirm this is really her handwriting," she said to Ben Howard, "then this map isn't just a clue, it's a confession." On March 11, 2011, the preliminary report from the forensics lab arrived. Tests from the hammerhead were positive for human blood, with DNA structure matching 99.7% to grandson Caleb Halden's sample. The conclusion line was bolded at the end of the report. "Blood stain belongs to direct blood relative of Dr. Richard Halden." Sarah Miller held the paper in her hand, silent for a long time. She knew that after 41 years, file hash 7112 was no longer a missing person case. It was officially reclassified, homicide, active investigation. That afternoon, she looked out the window, where sunset dyed the Tulsa streets red. In the old room, the 1970 evidence bags lay still on the table, but now they carried entirely different meaning. 41 years of silence had ended, and the second investigation, the one that would unveil one of Oklahoma's oldest mysteries, had just begun. On March 12, 2011, the Oklahoma City State Forensics Lab was placed under maximum security. On the central glass table, under cold white fluorescent lights, the rusted hammerhead from the 1970 case was placed on a sterile steel tray. No one in the room spoke a word, all eyes fixed on the spectral microscope screen. After 41 years, the final piece of evidence from file hash 7112 was about to answer the question the first generation of investigators couldn't. "Is there human blood on it, Dr.?" Thomas Greer, head of analysis, adjusted the lens, zooming in on the dark brown area between the wooden handle and the rust layer. Infrared light scanned the surface, projecting images of crystallized cell clusters onto the screen. He pointed, "See that? That's not iron rust. That's dried hemoglobin, characteristic of human blood." The team was silent for a few seconds. Then Greer turned to the young technician, his voice even but clear. "Cut a 2 mm section from this area. Prepare an LCN sample." LCN, low copy number DNA, was the new technique, allowing extraction of genetic sequences from extremely small samples, even just a few remaining cells. The wood sample was cut, placed in a centrifuge tube with extraction enzyme solution. The machine whirred steadily, the humming sound echoing through the room like the long dormant heartbeat of the case. When the solution changed color, the technician moved to the PCR step, DNA amplification. On the screen, the sequences began to appear faint at first, then sharpening. 3 days later, the lab sent a preliminary report to Captain Sarah Miller in Tulsa. Positive result. Human DNA traces present. Reference sample comparison needed. Sarah read the news, her hand clenching tightly. She immediately contacted the forensics lab to compare with Caleb Halden's sample. 2 weeks earlier, Caleb had sent the buccal swabs, preserved in liquid nitrogen. His sample was opened, extracted, and gene sequences matched against the hammerhead results. On March 18th, at 9 a.m., Dr. Greer entered the conference room, holding the report folder. Sarah and the 2 cold case investigators were waiting. He placed the paper on the table, looking at them through his thin glasses. Results complete. STR sequences from the hammer sample match 99.7% with Caleb Halden's DNA. No doubt, this is blood from a direct blood relative of Dr. Richard Halden. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Only the clock ticked softly on the wall. Then Sarah whispered, "So he really was murdered." Dr. Greer nodded. "It can't be coincidence. All loci markers match perfectly. We have blood, and we have the murder weapon." The evidence was immediately photographed, resealed in new bags, labeled in red, DNA positive, blood, human. Source: Richard Halden. Attached was an 8-page scientific report, signed by Greer and 2 other analysts. That afternoon, Sarah submitted the report to the state prosecutor's office. In the accompanying investigation summary, she wrote, "DNA evidence confirms the hammerhead seized in the 1970 disappearance contains blood from victim Richard Halden. This constitutes an element of violent act leading to death." Prosecutor Mark Grayson, who had declined to prosecute 40 years earlier, was now retired. But his successor, Kenton Reeves, read the report and said simply, "Green light. Re-investigate fully." That night, at the cold case office, Sarah and Ben Howard spread the old documents on the table. Eleanor's handwritten map, the hardware receipt, Jack's contradictory statements, all now carried entirely different meaning. If the hammer bore Halden's blood, then home repairs was no longer an excuse. It was evidence of preparation for the crime. Ben poured coffee, saying quietly, "So, we have the murder weapon. But what about the body?" Sarah replied, her voice firm. "If his blood is on the hammer, then his body is somewhere near Keystone Lake, and someone helped hide it." On March 21st, missing person file hash 7112 was officially renamed in the Oklahoma State Database. Case hash 7112. Homicide investigation. Victim, Dr. Richard Halden. The notice was sent to relevant agencies, marking the case's official reopening after 41 years. A small task force was formed, led by Sarah Miller, coordinating with the Tulsa County Sheriff's Office. She pinned a young photo of Halden to the whiteboard next to the old Keystone Lake map. Under the photo, she wrote in red marker, "Blood on hammer. What's hidden under the lake?" The afternoon sky darkened outside the window. Orange light cast over the neatly arranged evidence bags on the table. Items once deemed useless, now becoming the key to a crime. Sarah stood silently looking at Halden's photo, then said softly, like a promise, "Dr. Halden, this time we won't let you disappear again." The second investigation officially began, with blood evidence, a suspect who had never been tried, and 40 years of silence waiting to be broken. On April 2, 2011, Just 3 weeks after the DNA results were announced, Captain Sarah Miller decided to shift the investigation toward the second piece of evidence, the handwritten map that had been sealed for over 40 years. If the hammer confirmed the victim's blood, then the map, with the signature E. Brooks in the corner, could reveal who led Dr. Halden to his fateful place. At the Special Evidence Analysis Room at the University of Oklahoma, ancient document analyst Dr. Martin Keene carefully placed the yellowed map on the glass tray. The ink had faded, the paper brittle as if it could crumble at any moment. He donned nitrile gloves, adjusted the infrared light, then activated the infrared spectroscopy machine, a technology that allows seeing through layers of old ink to restore the original writing. Red light shone on the paper, the faint lines gradually becoming clear. After a few minutes, on the microscope screen appeared a handwritten line, with slightly slanted, even strokes. West Side Auxiliary Road, Keystone Lake. Old entrance. Sarah stood beside him, holding her breath. That was the exact area where her team had discovered the tire tracks in 1970, and where later mudslides were found. It couldn't be a coincidence. Keene zoomed in on the line, pointing to the right corner of the map. The connecting strokes of Fuse and Hug have the same writing pressure characteristics as the E. Brooks signature sample. The writer used a soft nib pen, blue ink, leaning toward a green tone, the exact type of Parker Quink produced before 1972. That statement left the room silent for a few seconds. Everyone understood what it meant. The map wasn't a later forgery, but written right in the time frame of the crime. On April 4th, Sarah sent an official handwriting analysis request to the FBI's Forensic Document Examination Unit. In the Central State Hospital Medical Records Archive, she found original signature samples of Dr. Eleanor Brooks on administrative forms from 1969. Neat handwriting, right slanted, characteristic with a closed loop on the E and an extended tail on the B. She compared them manually first, then sent both samples along with the digitized map to the FBI. 2 weeks later, the report returned with a bolded title. Handwriting Analysis Results. High degree of match, 96%. The expert's assessment read, matching identification features include slant, stroke pressure, pen lift curvature, inner character spacing, and characteristic right-handed joining style. It can be concluded, with high probability, that the writer of the line and the signer of E. Brooks are the same individual. Sarah finished reading, set the paper down on the table, and sighed. The second piece of evidence had perfectly aligned with the prime suspect. Only now did she understand why Sheriff Cole had written in his final note years ago. If anyone reopens this, start with the map. To further corroborate, she had the Oklahoma State Materials Research Lab determine the ink's age. The spectral analysis results confirmed the ink was Parker Quink Permanent Blue, a line imported from England, discontinued in 1972. The map paper was printed by local company Tulsa Cartographics in 1968, matching the time when Halden and Eleanor still worked together at Central State Hospital. No doubt anymore, this map was written before Halden disappeared, not a later copy. That evening, at the Tulsa Cold Case office, Sarah spread the restored photo of the map on the table under yellow light. Bold blue ink lines ran along the lake's edge, a small dot marking the exact spot where 40 years earlier, Sheriff Cole's team had staked red flags. Right below the line West Side Keystone Lake, a small pencil arrow noted Old Auxiliary Road, a designation only someone who had been to the scene would know. Sarah looked at it, then said softly. She didn't just draw the map, she directed the perpetrator herself. The next morning, April 16th, she met with the investigative team. On the whiteboard, the two pieces of evidence were connected with red marker, hammerhead with blood, handwritten map E. Brooks. Ben Howard commented, she couldn't accidentally be linked to both pieces of evidence. If she bought the hammer and personally drew the map leading to the lake, this is a plan, not random. Sarah nodded. We have the murder weapon, the blood, the map pointing to the scene. Now we're just missing one thing, a witness to confirm. She pulled from the drawer a 1970 photo of Jack Brooks, distracted eyes, crooked smile, and pinned it to the board next to Eleanor's photo. Red marker connected the two of them, then extended down to the line she added in the middle. If Eleanor drew the map, then who took it there? That question would lead the investigative team to the next turning point, where someone who had been silent for 40 years finally spoke up, and the map became the key that unlocked the deepest secret of the Halden case. May 2011. When Eleanor's handwritten map was confirmed authentic, Captain Sarah Miller understood she was missing only one final piece to turn the Halden case from suspicion into a complete criminal offense: the origin of the sledgehammer. She clearly remembered the line on the old receipt that Sheriff Cole had seized in 1970. E. Brooks, 1 sledgehammer, paid cash. Tulsa Hardware. Back then, the store only kept manual logs, no electronic records, so the store owner's testimony at the time wasn't further verified. But if she could find the original, she could prove the buyer was truly Eleanor, no one else. On the morning of May 8th, Sarah drove to the old neighborhood where Tulsa Hardware had been headquartered. The store had closed in the 1980s, now a small electronics shop. She met the new owner, who directed her to the company's old storage. Inside the dusty basement, dozens of heavy paper boxes stacked to the ceiling, each box labeled by fiscal year 1968, 1970. Sarah and the archivist flipped through ledger after ledger of old accounting books. Yellowed paper, the musty smell filling the room. Near noon, she stopped at the November 10th, 1970 entry book, 2 days before Dr. Halden disappeared. The handwriting was shaky but clear. E. Brooks, sledgehammer 10 pounds, paid cash, clerk, W. Harris. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone, photographed every page, then carefully closed the book. As she stepped out of the storage, the harsh sunlight made her squint, but a faint smile crossed her face. 40 years, and the paper had been waiting here. That afternoon, she tracked down the old Tulsa Hardware personnel records and located the ledger writer, Mr. Walter Harris, now 81 years old, living in Broken Arrow, a Tulsa suburb. He had been a store clerk for 30 years, retiring in 1983. When Sarah knocked on the door of his small house, the silver-haired man opened it, leaning on a cane but still sharp-minded. She held up an enlarged photo of the receipt. "Mr. Harris, do you remember the woman who bought this hammer in 1970? He looked at the line for a long time, then frowned slightly. "Lord, how many years ago was that? But yeah, I vaguely remember. Blonde hair, glasses, polite voice. Didn't seem like someone who did heavy work, so I joked, a 10-pound hammer for a lady?" She smiled, said it was buying for family to fix the house. Sarah asked further, "Was anyone with her?" He nodded, a bit slowly. "Yes, a young guy, skinny, tall, looked like a student. They paid cash, didn't want the receipt. I had to ask for a name to log it," she said quickly. E. Brooks. Sarah opened her tablet, displaying the black and white photo of Eleanor and Jack Brooks from 1970. She stood in the middle, smiling faintly. Jack beside her with hands in his pockets. Mr. Harris squinted closely, then nodded firmly. "That's them, that pair. I remember the woman's eyes, straight gaze, like she was hiding something." The confirmation left Sarah almost breathless. A living witness, an original ledger, and blood evidence in hand. The final piece of the 1970 event chain now fit perfectly. That evening, in her office, she pinned an enlarged photo of the receipt to the whiteboard, connecting it with red marker to the map and the sledgehammer. Below, she wrote in large letters, "Purchased murder weapon, prepared before the crime." Ben Howard, her colleague, walked in, looked at the board, and said, "It all points to her. The hammer, the map, even the witness. We just need to prove Halden was lured there, and why." Sarah replied softly. "Or, who drove him there?" On May 12th, she sent the official report to the state prosecutor's office. In the conclusion section, Sarah wrote, "Original receipt from Tulsa Hardware, dated October 11, 1970, confirms Dr. Eleanor Brooks purchased a 10-pound sledgehammer 2 days before the victim disappeared. Sales witness identifies Eleanor Brooks and grandson Jack Brooks as the buyers. Evidence matches timeline, bolstering the hypothesis of premeditated violent act preparation. As she left the office, the Tulsa sky turned to dusk. The last sunlight streamed through the glass, shining on the three pieces of evidence lined up on the table: hammer, map, receipt. They had been silent for 40 years, and now began speaking the same language, the language of calculated crime. Sarah looked back at the caseboard, dotting a final line in red marker below the investigation diagram. Chain of clues closing in, and it closes around one name only: Eleanor Brooks. When the map, the hammer, and the receipt were finally confirmed to all bear traces of Eleanor Brooks, Captain Sarah Miller understood the Halden case had gone beyond documents. She needed living witnesses, people who had seen or heard something in those fateful 2 days of 1970. Without human testimony, no matter how perfect the chain of physical evidence, it would only be mute puzzle pieces. Sarah and investigator Ben Howard began reviewing the list of Central State Hospital staff from that year. One name stood out in the archived records: Dr. Stephen Malloy, a colleague in the same department as Halden and Eleanor. He had retired, living in Norman at 74 years old. When Sarah arrived, Malloy welcomed them into his small house full of books and old medical files. Though frail, his memory was sharp. When Sarah placed photos of Halden and Eleanor on the table, he glanced briefly and nodded. "Those are two people I'll never forget." He recounted the afternoon of November 11, 1970, a day before Halden disappeared. "I just finished a consultation when I heard arguing in the hallway. When I stepped out, I saw Richard and Eleanor face to face. He was clutching a stack of files tightly, and she was speaking loudly, almost shouting, 'You'll never get it back.' I asked what was going on. They went silent. Then Richard said curtly, 'Nothing. Just a misunderstanding about research documents.' But when Eleanor left, I saw him trembling, like he was holding back rage." Sarah asked, "Do you know what documents they were talking about?" Malloy shook his head. "No, but that day he said to me, 'If I disappear, don't believe her.' I thought it was a joke. Now, maybe not." That testimony matched perfectly with what Margaret Halden had said 40 years earlier, that her husband feared being threatened by someone. Sarah felt a chill down her spine. She thanked Malloy, recorded the entire conversation, then left in silence. That afternoon, Sarah and Ben went to Central State Hospital to track down the 1970 security staff. After several inquiries, they located Raymond Ray McCall, then only 20 years old, now over 60, living in the Oklahoma City suburbs. He recognized the name immediately when Sarah mentioned Halden, the tall doctor with black hair driving the green Ford. "Of course I remember. That night, I was on the evening shift." Sarah asked, "Did you see anything unusual?" McCall nodded, his face serious. "I saw Jack Brooks, Dr. Eleanor's nephew, standing in the admin parking lot around 9:30 p.m. on November 12th. Heavy rain. I asked, 'What are you still doing here?' He said, 'Waiting for my aunt to pick me up.' I thought it was odd, because Eleanor usually didn't work late like that. About 15 minutes later, I saw Dr. Halden's Ford Galaxy leave the lot. The headlights swept over Jack. I remember clearly, because he was standing with his back turned, wearing a light-colored raincoat. After that, both were gone." "Did you see Eleanor?" "No, but I heard another car start up not long after. Could have been hers." Sarah fell silent. Now the question who drove him there, that she had written on the whiteboard, had an answer: Jack Brooks. He was at the hospital that evening, at the same time Halden left. And if Eleanor also left home, as the guard implied, then they had gone to Keystone Lake together. To verify, Sarah pulled the 1970 witness statements, including one from a truck driver who said he had seen two cars stopped on the road near Keystone Lake on a rainy night. Back then, police hadn't followed up due to darkness and poor visibility. Sarah was determined to find him. After 3 days of tracing, she located the man named Harold Hank Wilkins, who had driven logging trucks for a local company. He now lived in Kansas at 79 years old. When contacted, Wilkins hesitated a moment, then said, "You're talking about that old Dr. Disappearance case. I remember that night well, rain pouring down. I was driving past the West Levee section of the lake, saw two cars parked right at the roadside, one a light green Ford, the other smaller, maybe a Chevy Impala. I was gonna stop and ask, but the rain was too heavy. When I went another few hundred yards, I glanced in the mirror and only saw one car left, the Ford, with lights off." Sarah asked, "Can you be sure it was a Ford Galaxy?" Wilkins nodded. "Sure, I'd driven that model. Oval taillights, unmistakable." She sent him a photo of Halden's car, and he confirmed, "That's it, exactly this one." When Sarah pieced it together, every fragment fit in an eerie way. November 11th, Eleanor and Halden argued fiercely over research documents. Evening of November 12th, Jack appeared in the hospital parking lot, saying he was waiting for Aunt to pick him up at the same time Halden left. That same night, two cars stopped by Keystone Lake. Then only one remained, Halden's Ford Galaxy. 3 testimonies, 3 moments, 1 story. Eleanor had lured Halden to Keystone Lake, with Jack as the accomplice. The next morning, Sarah reported directly to the state prosecutor. Prosecutor Reeves listened and simply said, "I think it's time to go beyond Oklahoma. If Jack Brooks is still alive, he's the only link who can confirm what happened." That afternoon, the cold case team sent a federal cooperation request to locate Jack in Florida, where he had undergone psychiatric treatment. Sarah looked at the case board, the red threads now connecting the photos. Halden, Eleanor, Jack, Keystone Lake. The picture that Sheriff Cole had tried to draw in 1971 was finally taking shape. And this time, no rain was heavy enough to wash it away. June 2011. After more than 40 years, the name Jack Brooks, once only existing in old testimony transcripts and yellowed black and white photos, finally reappeared in the federal system. Based on the state prosecutor's retrieval order, Captain Sarah Miller received a thick file from the U.S. Department of Justice, Jack Brooks, Florida State Psychiatric Records, 1978, 2002, note treated for paranoid schizophrenia. No criminal record. Current residence, St. Augustine Nursing Facility, St. Johns County. She read the end of the file, over and over, where the treating doctor's handwritten note read, "He still often mentions a woman who made him commit a mistake, but refuses to name her." On June 22nd, Sarah flew down to St. Augustine, bringing an Oklahoma prosecutor's office cooperation order and an interrogation recording camera. Outside the St. John's Recovery Home Nursing Facility, the Florida sky was strangely clear, sunlight filtering through tall palms, a far cry from the chill of Keystone Lake years ago. The duty nurse led her down a long hallway, where the smell of disinfectant mixed with faint TV sounds from patient rooms. Jack Brooks sat alone in the back courtyard, silver hair, slightly hunched back, skinny hands. At 64, he looked gentle, almost harmless. But Sarah knew well that behind that face lay a secret, buried for over half a century. She sat in the chair opposite, opened her notebook, and said gently, "Mr. Brooks, I'm Captain Sarah Miller from Oklahoma. I need to ask you a few things about the night of November 12, 1970. He looked up, his cloudy eyes flashing briefly, as if recognizing something. "They sent someone again?" His voice hoarse, trembling. Sarah didn't answer, just opened the black and white photo of Dr. Richard Halden and placed it on the table. Jack looked at it for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I remember him. He was a good man." She turned on the recorder, asking gently, "You were with Mr. Halden that night, weren't you?" Jack was silent for a long time. The ceiling fan whirred softly overhead. Then he exhaled, saying quietly, "Aunt Eleanor told me to just scare him. Said he was a bad man, had hurt her. I believed her. She always knew how to make me believe." Sarah leaned forward. "Scare him with what, Jack?" "With the hammer. She bought it. I remember her asking me, 'Which one is heavy enough to make a man afraid?'" He gave a dry laugh, then fell silent. "Then what happened?" Jack closed his eyes, his trembling hands clasping together. He wasn't afraid. He came closer to me, asked what I was doing. I panicked. I hit for real. Once, then again. He fell down, and I just heard the rain. The room seemed to freeze. Sarah stayed calm, her voice low. Was Eleanor there? Jack nodded. Yes, she drove us there. Before I could understand anything, she said, "Get in the car, we have to leave here." Where did she drive to? To the lake. To the lake. To the place. She told me to draw on the map. She told me to dig, but the rain was heavy. The clay stuck to my hands. I just remember her standing there watching, saying nothing. Then she said, "No one will find him, Jack." Sarah gripped her pen tightly. That statement, after 40 years, had finally been spoken aloud by the person involved. She asked softly, "What happened after that?" Jack stared fixedly at the ground. "She told me to go home, sleep, forget everything. The next morning, the paper reported doctor missing," she said. "Poor man. He must have skidded his car into the lake." He looked up, his eyes wet. I believed her. I was so stupid. Sarah opened the restored map and placed it in front of him. "Is this the map she gave you?" Jack looked at it, then nodded firmly. "Yes, this exact one. I remember she wrote it with blue ink, Parker type. I asked why not use pencil," she said. "Rain might erase the writing." She showed him a photo of the hammer, asking, "Are you sure this is the hammer?" Jack's hand trembled as he lightly touched the photo. I held it. I hit him with it. After that, Sarah stayed silent to let him rest. She called the nurse to bring water, then continued the final part of the interrogation. "Jack, do you know where the body was buried?" He shook his head, his voice choked. "She told me to sit in the car, then drove around the lake shore a bit. I saw the headlights reflecting on the water, heard the ground collapsing. After that, she came back and said, 'It's done.'" Sarah asked, "Did she threaten you?" He replied, whispering, "No. She just said, if I told, no one would believe me." "I'm sick." The interrogation lasted nearly 3 hours. Finally, Jack signed the recorded statement transcript, confirming the entire content. Eleanor Brooks had planned it, bought the murder weapon, drew the map, and drove with him to Keystone Lake, where Dr. Halden's body was buried. He only added one short line at the end of the paper. "I'm sorry for believing the only person I thought was family." Before leaving the facility, Sarah turned back to ask softly, "Do you regret it, Jack?" He gave a faint smile, his voice breaking. "Regret is all I've done for the past 40 years. That afternoon, Sarah sent the recording back to Tulsa via the Department of Justice's secure channel. The report was immediately forwarded to State Prosecutor Kenton Reeves. When he finished watching, he said only one thing: "Enough. Start the prosecution process against Eleanor Brooks." From the sunny Florida coast, Sarah looked west, where summer winds still blew over Keystone Lake. Now, every piece had fit together: the hammer, the map, the receipt, and Jack's belated confession. She thought time could cover up the crime, but what was buried for 40 years had finally returned to the surface. Early morning on July 21, 2011, the New York sky was overcast, strong winds blowing through the narrow streets of the Upper West Side. In the old red brick building on the 4th floor, federal police and Oklahoma State investigators quietly positioned their team. After 41 years, the name Dr. Eleanor Brooks, once regarded as a renowned psychologist, was now on a state warrant for murder in the first degree. At exactly 6:15 a.m., FBI agent Michael Trent nodded the signal. 3 officers approached the door, knocking hard. "FBI, Dr. Brooks, we have a warrant for your arrest." No response. After 10 seconds, they broke the lock and burst in. Eleanor was standing in the living room, wearing a gray robe, holding a cup of coffee. She only glanced at the badge, showing no surprise, no resistance. When the cuffs locked on her wrists, she said only one thing, so softly it was almost a whisper: "You're later than I thought." During the apartment search, the investigative team seized an old brown leather notebook dated 1970. Inside were numerous notes in handwriting, matching the script on the Keystone Lake map. Additionally, they found 2 letters sent to Jack Brooks at the end of 1971, one of which read, "We'll be fine if we stay silent. No one can prove anything." In the desk drawer, they discovered a black and blue Parker 51 pen, the exact type of ink pen identified as used to write the map. When read her Miranda rights, Eleanor remained completely silent, neither objecting nor showing emotion. Only when Agent Trent asked, "Do you want to say anything about the Halden case?" she turned, her voice calm as if lecturing, "I won't say anything without a lawyer, and I want to see him right now." At the exact same time, over 1,000 miles south in St. Augustine, Florida, local police coordinated with the FBI to arrest Jack Brooks, who had signed his confession just 2 weeks earlier. Due to his cooperation, the arrest went smoothly. Jack was cuffed while sitting in the nursing facility's reading room. He only asked one short question, "Is she arrested too?" When confirmed, he nodded. "Good. Finally, it's over." The 2 arrests were executed nearly simultaneously, a carefully calculated plan by the Oklahoma Cold Case Unit and the FBI to prevent Eleanor from fleeing or destroying documents. That afternoon, the news spread across media outlets. Psychologist arrested after over 40 years suspected of killing colleague. 1970. Cold case, Eleanor Brooks and grandson charged with murder. Media swarmed in front of the building where Eleanor lived. Images of her being led away, still holding her posture straight and eyes cold, appeared on the front pages of the New York Times and Tulsa World. At FBI Manhattan headquarters, the first interrogation took place that same day. However, Eleanor refused to answer any questions, saying only briefly, "I'll speak in court." The lawyer she hired, Robert Keegan, a criminal defense specialist, immediately requested a full halt to the questioning process, citing his client's absolute right to silence. Nevertheless, the physical evidence was overwhelmingly clear. The pen matching the ink type, the notebook notes about the Keystone Lake area, letters exchanged with Jack, and the DNA results on the hammer. All were sealed and transported back to Oklahoma under federal supervision. On July 25, 2011, a police charter flight carried Eleanor Brooks from New York, landing at Tulsa International Airport under strict escort. She was extradited back to Oklahoma and held at Tulsa County Jail pending arraignment. Before the media cameras, she maintained her cold demeanor, offering no justification. When a reporter asked, "Do you regret it?" Eleanor only turned her head, saying softly, "I regret believing in the memories of the weak." Meanwhile in Florida, Jack Brooks was transferred to separate custody, becoming the state prosecutor's key witness. His recorded confession was sent to Tulsa as pivotal evidence for the prosecution. As night fell, Sarah Miller sat in the cold case office, looking through the glass window at the brightly lit city. Beside her were the 3 old pieces of evidence, the hammer, the map, and the receipt, now carrying a different meaning. No longer vague traces in the missing person #7112 file, but concrete proof in a first-degree murder case. 41 years of silence had finally ended with the cold click of iron handcuffs. Justice for Dr. Richard Halden, after all those years, had begun to move forward. 2 days after being extradited to Oklahoma, Dr. Eleanor Brooks was brought to a special interrogation room at Tulsa Police Department headquarters. The room was brightly lit and cold, 4 bare walls, only a metal table, 2 chairs, and a recording camera. Facing her were Captain Sarah Miller and Prosecutor Kenton Reeves. On the table were the pieces of evidence, neatly placed in sealed bags, the handwritten map, the receipt, and the sledgehammer. The items that had turned the 1970 disappearance case into a murder. Eleanor sat straight-backed, hands clasped together. Her hair was mostly gray now, but her eyes remained sharply cold, as if this were just an academic interview rather than a criminal interrogation. Sarah began, "Miss Brooks, we have a 48-hour interrogation warrant with your lawyer present. Everything you say will be recorded and used in court. Do you understand?" Eleanor nodded, her voice soft but clear. I understand, and I assert that I had nothing to do with Richard Halden's death. Sarah placed the receipt on the table. E. Brooks, Sledgehammer, paid cash. October 11th, 1970. Eleanor glanced at it, giving a faint smile. An old piece of paper proves nothing. I bought the hammer to fix floorboards. I said that 40 years ago. And this map? Sarah pushed the infrared restored paper toward her. Clearly your signature, drawn exactly at the Keystone Lake area where Halden's tire tracks were found. Eleanor looked it over, then shrugged. I had dozens of psychiatric patients at the hospital, many afraid of getting lost. I drew maps for them every day. Does every map make me a criminal? Prosecutor Reeves didn't respond. He opened the third bag, pulling out a copy of the DNA test results and placing it before her, his voice low. The blood sample on the hammerhead matches 99.7% with Dr. Halden's grandson's DNA. We've sent samples to the federal lab for cross-verification. The results are irrefutable. Eleanor blinked slightly, falling silent. A faint tremor at the corner of her mouth made Sarah realize the woman's cold composure was beginning to crack. But Eleanor still said nothing. Reeves continued. Would you like to see Jack Brooks's recorded statement? Eleanor looked up. Jack is mentally ill. His words are worthless. Sarah turned on the small screen. A faint static sound played. Jack Brooks's trembling voice, she said just to scare him. I hit him, then she told me to bury the car in the lake. Eleanor stared fixedly at the screen, unblinking. When the video ended, she remained silent. Sarah asked, do you want to respond? She looked up, her voice hoarse. I didn't kill anyone. I just knew he was dead. The statement silenced the room. Reeves immediately noted it, his voice even. Can you clarify that, Dr. Brooks? Eleanor bowed her head, hands clenched tightly. After a moment, she spoke slowly. That night Jack called me. He was panicked, said he'd hit him. I rushed to the lake, saw the car slid down the embankment. He was lying there, blood everywhere. I knew he wasn't breathing anymore. I didn't know what to do. Jack was crying, begging me to help. I helped him. Sarah looked straight at her. How did you help? Eleanor replied, her voice dropping low. I drove around, got a shovel, and picked from the trunk, then told him to pull the car into the water. We buried the car near the West Auxiliary Road area by the lake. I thought the water would wash everything away. But I was wrong. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Sarah gripped her pen tightly, noting every word. Can you specify the burial location? Eleanor looked up, her gaze indifferently terrifying. Yes, I remember clearly. Right behind the old wooden bridge, near the abandoned power station. From Highway 51, turn left. Go another half-mile. The ground there is soft, and no one goes there. Sarah opened a new topographic map and pushed it toward her. Eleanor took the pen, drawing a small X and circling the area. Here, she said softly. If the ground hasn't been dug up, he's still there. Reeves recorded all the coordinates, requiring Eleanor to sign the transcript. She signed, hand steady, then leaned back in the chair, closing her eyes. You admit to burying the car? Sarah asked one last time. No. Eleanor opened her eyes. I said, I helped Jack. That's the difference. The interrogation ended at 11:47 p.m. After nearly 48 straight hours. As Eleanor was escorted back to her cell, Sarah stood looking through the interrogation room's glass window. The woman walked slowly, her posture still straight, as if she'd never feared anything. The very next morning, the Keystone Task Force investigative team was urgently formed, coordinating with the Oklahoma Geological Survey and Federal Salvage Unit. They brought ground-penetrating radar equipment, sonar, and heavy metal detectors. The sole objective, verify the coordinates Eleanor provided. 41 years after that rainy night, Keystone Lake's surface was about to witness the return of headlights, salvage boats, and those seeking the truth, buried under layers of red mud. And this time, no one would leave in silence. On August 5th, 2011. Keystone Lake was shrouded in early morning mist. The west side area, where Eleanor Brooks had marked the coordinates in her statement, was completely cordoned off. The Oklahoma State Forensics Team, along with geological survey experts and FBI technicians, set up a field camp right at the water's edge. After 41 years, the final search for Dr. Richard Halden officially began. Captain Sarah Miller was there from early morning, standing by the command vehicle, watching the technical team deploy ground-penetrating radar GPR equipment. Modern ground-penetrating radar capable of scanning up to 10 meters deep through mud and rock. Two engineers slowly maneuvered the device along the shore, the screen displaying continuous wave reflections. Near mid-morning, one of the engineers stopped, his voice urgent. Large metal object under the mud surface, about 2.4 meters down, curved shape, likely a vehicle frame. Sarah leaned down to view the GPR image, an anomalous mass, arc-shaped reflection, size matching a 1968 Ford Galaxy body. She said nothing, just signaled the excavation team to prepare. At 3 p.m., a mobile crane was set up, and the dive team began pumping water from the marked area. As the first layer of mud was removed, rusted metal began to emerge. Wheel arch, front bumper bar, and a faded license plate segment, 4B27, nearly matching Halden's vehicle records. Officer Ben Howard whispered, "My God, he's really here after all." When the entire vehicle frame was lifted from the water, the stench of rust and damp mud filled the air intensely. Inside the cabin, technicians spotted a dark fabric scrap stuck to the seat frame and a length of wire wrapped around the rear door bar. Sarah stood silently, recalling Jack Brooks's statement. "She told me to pull the car down, use wire to secure it." Everything matched eerily. When the car door was pried open, flashlight beams swept over a human skeleton, lying slumped in the driver's seat. The body had fully decomposed, leaving only bones and a few fabric fibers clinging to the brown wool jacket. In the front seat crevice, the forensics team collected a wristwatch fragment and keys engraved with RH. No one spoke a word. Sarah just bowed her head slightly. The bones were collected per forensic protocol, transferred to sealed boxes. A week later, the state's dental examination lab completed a comparison of 1969 archived dental records from Central State Hospital with teeth found in the skull. Results: perfect match. The report stated clearly, remains identified as Dr. Richard Halden, male, 33 years old at time of death. But what left the entire team stunned was the supplemental forensic examination results. The right side of the victim's skull had a semicircular fracture, nearly 7 centimeters wide, perfectly corresponding to the diameter of the hammerhead seized in 1970. Forensic pathologist Dr. James Holloway confirmed, struck with a heavy round-headed object, forceful blow from the rear right side. Victim died almost immediately. Sarah read the report with a slight tremble in her hand. Every piece, from the map, receipt, statements, was now verified by irrefutable evidence: real body, real wound, real murder weapon. On August 12, 2011, the police department held a press conference at the scene. Behind the podium, the fully salvaged Ford Galaxy frame lay still under a tarp cover, next to a small sign reading, Case #7112, recovered, 2011. Sarah stood before dozens of reporters, speaking briefly. "We can confirm Dr. Richard Halden has been found. The 1970 missing person case is now officially classified as premeditated murder." In her Tulsa jail cell, when the news was relayed, Eleanor Brooks only stared at the wall in front of her, saying nothing. And at the Florida Detention Center, Jack Brooks broke down crying upon hearing Halden's remains had been found. "At least, now he's not forgotten anymore," he said. After 41 years, Keystone Lake, the place that once swallowed both man and car, where rain and time seemed to have erased every trace, had finally returned the truth. By the lake shore, Sarah Miller removed her gloves, looking down at the murky water closing over behind the crane. She said softly, almost just to herself, "You're home now, Dr. Halden. The missing person #7112 case officially closed its search phase." But justice, the thing he was denied for 4 decades, had only just begun to be named. On September 20th, 2011, more than a month after the successful excavation at Keystone Lake, the Oklahoma State Forensics Lab released a comprehensive 118-page examination report. The document was stamped red, confidential, homicide investigation, and sent directly to the state prosecutor's office and the cold case unit. On the first page, the conclusion line was bolded. Cause of death, homicide, blunt force trauma to the skull. The report showed that all evidence recovered from the scene, the hammerhead, wire, skull bone fragment, and Ford Galaxy frame, had been tested simultaneously at 3 independent labs. The results were unanimous. Trace DNA on the hammerhead matched Dr. Richard Halden's blood, while biological traces on the wire matched the victim's wrist bone sample perfectly. The summary line at the end concluded, the hammer, wire, and bone sample all carry the same biological source, victim Richard Halden. Mechanism of death, severe skull trauma from direct blunt object impact. When reading the report, Captain Sarah Miller fell silent. Everything now was no longer speculation or fragmented memories from those who had lived in the shadow of 1970, but an irrefutable chain of scientific evidence. Inside the state prosecutor's office, Kenton Reeves and his team of assistants immediately opened the prosecution file. The dossier, over 2,000 pages thick, included all physical evidence, hammer, map, receipt, letters, Parker 51 pen, forensic reports on DNA, dental, and skull fracture structure, Jack Brooks's recorded testimony, Eleanor Brooks's partial confession, along with coordinates diagram of the burial site, all arranged into a prosecution file titled State of Oklahoma versus Dr. Eleanor Brooks and Jack Brooks case hash 2011-214. On October 4, 2011, Prosecutor Reeves officially signed the criminal indictment. Eleanor Brooks charged with second-degree murder under Section 21-701.8 of Oklahoma state law. With aggravating factors for preparation and concealment of the crime, Jack Brooks charged with accessory after the fact to murder for helping conceal the body and crime vehicle and covering up the offense for 40 years. In a brief press conference at the prosecutor's building, Reeves spoke before the TV cameras. After 41 years, we have what the first generation of investigators could not. Scientific evidence, direct witnesses, and undeniable truth. Justice for Dr. Richard Halden is no longer a distant concept. Inside Tulsa County Jail, Eleanor Brooks received the indictment notice with a composed expression. When the officer read the charges, she only said coldly, "I didn't kill him, I just cleaned up the mess someone else made." But her defense attorney, Robert Keegan, understood that those words weren't enough to shake the forensic results. He declared he would prepare a defense based on diminished responsibility, arguing mental state disorder, claiming Eleanor had been obsessed and acted in panic after Halden's unexpected death. Meanwhile, Jack Brooks continued to cooperate, transferred to a secure federal holding facility. He signed an agreement to serve as the prosecution's key witness in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. In his final deposition, Jack said, "I've lived with nightmares for 40 years. I'm not afraid of prison anymore. I just want to tell it all so he can rest in peace." By the end of 2011, all evidentiary documents were formalized per procedural rules. The trial was scheduled to open in February 2012 at Tulsa County Court, with Prosecutor Reeves representing the state of Oklahoma. The witness list included over 30 people, among them Dr. Stephen Malloy, security guard Raymond McCall, and truck driver Harold Wilkins, witnesses who had helped close the event chain spanning 4 decades. The night before submitting the final filing, Sarah Miller stayed alone in the office. On the desk were the 3 first pieces of evidence she had once opened from file box hash 7112, hammer, map, receipt. All resealed, but now they carried a different weight, not just evidence, but living testimony for a generation of investigators who had failed to bring justice. She wrote the final line in the summary report sent to the state prosecutor. Final conclusion, Victim Richard Halden died from severe impact to the skull. Murder charge proven. Case hash 7112 officially closes investigation phase. Proceeds to criminal prosecution. After 41 years, the dusty old file, once forgotten in storage, became the foundation for one of Oklahoma's most significant cold cases in history. And the winter of 2011 closed with an indisputable truth. Justice for Dr. Halden was on its way to the Tulsa courtroom. February 2012, nearly 42 years after the rainy night that made Dr. Richard Halden disappear. Tulsa County Courthouse became the focal point of the entire state of Oklahoma. The press called it the trial closing the state's longest cold case in history. Outside the courthouse gates, hundreds of locals, reporters, and even former 1970 investigators stood silently watching the defendant transport convoy pass by. In courtroom 3, Dr. Eleanor Brooks, 73 years old, appeared with gray hair, wearing a gray suit, walking slowly to the defendant's chair. A few rows away sat Jack Brooks, 64 years old, frail and trembling-handed, allowed to sit separately due to health issues. Facing them was Prosecutor Kenton Reeves, along with Captain Sarah Miller's cold case team, invited as the lead witness. On the prosecution table were 4 pieces of evidence in sealed boxes: the hammerhead, the handwritten E. Brooks map, the Tulsa hardware receipt, and photos of the Ford Galaxy frame, excavated from Keystone Lake in 2011. The trial opened with Prosecutor Reeves's opening statement. He stood straight, his voice low but clear, as if recounting a story weighted for over 40 years. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not just a murder case, this is a truth buried for 4 decades. What you will hear today is not rumor or faded memory, but scientific evidence, DNA, handwriting, physical items, and verified testimony. On the large screen, Reeves presented each piece of evidence, enlarged photo of DNA sample extracted from the hammerhead, matching 99.7% with victim Richard Halden's blood. FBI handwriting analysis results, 96%, match with Eleanor Brooks's medical signature. The November 10, 1970 receipt, clearly bearing her name, purchasing a 10-pound sledgehammer 2 days before the disappearance. Excavation photos from Keystone Lake, Ford Galaxy frame, wire, brown jacket scrap, and human skeleton, with skull fracture, matching the hammerhead diameter. Reeves paused, looking straight at the jury. All of this, from the map to the hammer, tells the same story. The story of a smart, calculating woman and a meticulously prepared plan. After presenting the evidence, Reeves called Jack Brooks as a witness. The courtroom fell silent as Jack approached the stand, trembling hand holding the microphone. His voice was hoarse and weak, but each sentence clear. My aunt told me to just scare him, but I hit for real. Then she told me to drive to Keystone Lake. She dug, I watched. She said, "No one will find him, Jack." I believed her, and I've lived with that guilt for 40 years. When Reeves asked, "Did she ever show remorse?" Jack replied, "No." My aunt said, "A man like Halden, if alive, would destroy us." That testimony made the courtroom heavy as lead. Taking his turn, Eleanor's defense attorney Robert Keegan stood to counterattack. He focused on the prosecution's sole weakness, Jack Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're talking about the testimony of a man diagnosed with schizophrenia, treated for over 20 years with hallucinations and paranoia. Can you base a conviction of a 73-year-old woman on the words of someone like that? As for the hammer map receipt, those are inanimate objects, unable to prove murderous intent. Keegan skillfully directed the jury to see Eleanor as a misunderstood elderly woman, emphasizing she had been a dedicated doctor with no prior record. He argued the blow could have been an accident during a scuffle, and burying the car, only an act of concealing a mistake out of fear. Eleanor, when questioned, maintained her calm voice. "I didn't plan to kill him. I just wanted him out of my life." But when Reeves held up the photo of the blood-stained hammer and asked, "Do you deny this is the hammer you bought?" Eleanor fell silent. The trial lasted over 3 weeks. with more than 30 witnesses summoned. Captain Sarah Miller was the last to stand before the jury. Summarizing the investigation, she said, "Evidence doesn't lie. When science and time stand together, the truth always surfaces." On March 16, 2012, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The air was thick as Judge Harold Denton asked the final question. "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman stood, hand trembling slightly, but voice firm, "Yes, Your Honor." On defendant Eleanor Brooks, guilty of second-degree murder. On defendant Jack Brooks, guilty of accessory after the fact. The judge banged the gavel 3 times. The sound echoed through the room. Eleanor sat motionless, only turning slightly to look at Jack. He bowed his head, tears falling onto his trembling hands. A week later, in the formal sentencing hearing, Judge Denton read the final judgment. Eleanor Brooks, 20 years imprisonment at Oklahoma State Penitentiary for women, with parole eligibility after 15 years. Jack Brooks, 8 years at a Florida federal facility, including time served. The judge concluded with one short but resounding sentence: "Justice may be slow, but it never disappears." On the front pages the next morning, bold headlines appeared. State of Oklahoma versus Eleanor Brooks. Justice after 41 years. The missing person #7112 case file was officially renamed in the justice system, State of Oklahoma versus Eleanor Brooks. In the summary report sent to the Department of Justice, Captain Sarah Miller wrote, "The case closes, but its legacy is not tragedy, but a reminder that justice sometimes lies not in speed, but in the persistence of those who never stop seeking the truth." Outside the courthouse, light rain fell on the old stone roof. After 41 years, Oklahoma finally heard the gavel's verdict for the man who lay under Keystone Lake, and that echo, though late, was justice. April 2012, Oklahoma buzzed with unprecedented news waves. On the front page of the Tulsa World, a massive headline took up half the page: "Oklahoma's oldest cold case solved by DNA and handwriting." Local papers, national TV stations, even Time magazine all covered the Richard Halden case simultaneously. The case solved after 41 years, thanks to DNA technology, handwriting analysis, and the persistence of a young investigative team. The name Sarah Miller, the captain leading the cold case unit, became a new symbol of faith that justice can be slow, but never extinguished. In Norman, where Dr. Halden once taught at Central State Hospital's medical school, the school board held an emergency meeting to address Eleanor Brooks's academic legacy, once honored as a pioneering icon in clinical psychology research. On April 20th, the honor plaque in the main hallway was removed, her name erased from the school's academic publications. The department head declared to the press, "We cannot honor someone who used knowledge to cover up crime. The honor of medicine cannot be tied to lies." At the same time, the Norman and Tulsa communities raised funds to erect a memorial plaque for Dr. Richard Halden at the west shore of Keystone Lake, the exact place where he was found. The simple stone plaque, engraved with Dr. Richard Halden, 1937-1970, a healer, betrayed, but never forgotten. The memorial ceremony took place under a lightly sunny sky. Caleb Halden, the grandson's couple, flew in from California, placing a white wreath by the plaque. Sarah Miller was also present, standing silently looking at the rippling lake surface, the place that once swallowed all traces, now reflecting the light of truth. When asked by reporters for her thoughts, she only said, "It all started from an old blood stain, a handwritten map. No evidence is small if we believe it carries the voice of the departed." That statement was later quoted verbatim in CBS News's evening broadcast, seen as the most succinct summary of the entire case. On the law enforcement side, the Tulsa Police Department established the Cold Case Halden Fund to support reinvestigations of missing persons and unsolved cases statewide. At the announcement ceremony, Police Chief Harold Denton stated, "An old blood stain, a handwritten map, and justice rewritten. We learned that sometimes, to see justice, we must dare to look back at the past, no matter how painful." After the verdict, public sentiment also showed sympathy for Jack Brooks, the nephew manipulated throughout his youth. When transferred to a Florida correctional center, he sent a letter to the prosecutor's office, written in a trembling hand, "I've lived in fear for 40 years. Now finally, I can sleep." In Oklahoma, Richard Halden's name returned to medical training programs as a symbol of professional integrity and the courage of truth seekers. In September 2012, the Oklahoman published a long recap article, ending with "From Keystone Lake to the Tulsa courtroom, justice took a 41-year journey. It arrived late, but never lost its way." And below, a photo of Halden's memorial plaque quietly reflecting on the water, the place where finally, Oklahoma found the truth again, and justice finally spoke. The Oklahoma 1970 story reminds us, amid life in the United States today, that justice often comes from overlooked small details and human persistence. A trace bloodstain on the hammerhead, restored by STRLCN DNA. A handwritten A. Brooks map, recovered by infrared. A Tulsa hardware receipt, written paid cash. 3 days before the victim vanished, and Keystone Lake coordinates provided by the suspect herself, those scattered pieces closed the case after 41 years. Practical lessons for the present: 1. Don't overlook small signs. If a loved one changes behavior, leaves words like Dr. Halden, "If anything happens, I didn't do it to myself." Call 911, request a welfare check, save messages, receipts. In the digital age, small data is the red thread. 2. Don't let reputation obscure ethical boundaries. Eleanor was a doctor, but positional power doesn't exempt oversight. Workplaces need binding rules on relationships and safe whistleblower mechanisms. 3. Mental health needs compassionate yet rigorous treatment. Jack had a disorder, but truth was verified by physical evidence, reminding us to balance empathy and proof. 4. Community plays a decisive role. The parking lot guard witness, truck driver, and Captain Sarah Miller show why to support cold case funds, clear DNA backlogs, maintain file archives. Finally, as the chief said, an old bloodstain, a handwritten map, and justice rewritten. Persist, preserve evidence, speak up early, so justice arrives late, but never loses its way. If you believe that justice, even if late, is always worth seeking, please subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cold cases revived by truth and persistence. Thank you for following the story of Dr. Richard Halden. See you in the next episode, where another small clue might change everything.